If the internet's to be believed, this is going to try and eat me at least once during the course of this film. That's because the Renault Clio V6 didn't just come with a reputation, it came with the reputation. Because while it looks like the sort of Clio that you, and actually my mum, used to drive around in the noughties, but with a bit of a body kit on it, it's actually much more than that.
For starters, where a normal Clio would have rear seats and a boot is, in this Phase 2 car, a 3-litre V6 with 255 brake horsepower and 221 pound-foot. That rather ruins the whole practical hatch side of things. That power, mercifully, doesn't go to the front wheels but the rears. 0 to 62 miles an hour takes 5.8 seconds and it'll do over 150 miles an hour. It's not slow then. But why is it a thing?
In the late 90s, Renault had a one-make race series with Clio V6 trophies that looked an awful lot like the second generation Clio that was doing the rounds. Of course, if you like the race car, you could buy it as a road car, kinda. But in 1998 at the Paris Motor Show, Renault revealed a road-going concept of that race car, and it went down really well. So well, in fact, that Renault decided to have a bit of a think to see whether it should put it into production. Renault got in touch with race legends TWR to see if it would be feasible to turn the race car into a road car. In early 1999, TWR made a couple of mules, and Renault liked what it saw and greenlit the Phase 1 car, the 230 horsepower Clio V6. The car was launched to the press in October 2000. From idea to execution, it's not a lot of time.
The first generation car was 171mm wider than a normal Clio of the time, with 110mm wider track up front and 138mm more at the rear. It was 66mm lower and 38mm longer too. Suspension was all new, McPherson up front and multi-link at the rear, with a front anti-roll bar taken from the Clio Trophy Racer. The rear of the car, because there was an engine and new springs, was all new for the V6, but the front was based on the much celebrated Clio 172.
TWR hand-assembled the Phase 1 cars in a plant in Sweden at a rate of 12 a day. In all, 1,631 were built. They were a hark back to the Renault 5 turbos of old, to Group B, and just a glorious exercise in what if race car but on the road. And that's actually probably a good time to talk about the race cars. You see, they were quite pointy and quite crashy thanks to the way they were set up and then how they handled. Now, I spoke to a former Clio V6 racer who said, and I quote, "Oh well, he was really fast, but he was an angry little." He also said he enjoyed his time with the race car, apart from the time it tried to kill him. Right. Great.
See, the way it was set up meant it was super spiky. Racers had to brake later and adjust for the fact that the rear might hop in corners rather than push you through, and much more besides. Though it was noted it had some cracking feedback. Until it didn't. Its rep carried over to the road car, and then some.
That pointy handling was the undoing of many a journalist on the initial press launch. Tales of spins and what have you were not uncommon. One journalist left the road and ended up down a ravine, sustaining serious injuries in the process. Speaking to someone who was there, there were numerous crashes and plenty of lunched gearboxes.
With no traction control to help, it earned its reputation. It did have ABS though, which is quite pleasant. Its turning circle was woeful, steering slow, and because the engine sits high up, the centre of gravity didn't help when the car decided it wanted to swap ends. Pointy? Very yes. Cool? Very, very yes. However, the Phase 1 car wasn't the end of the story.
This is the Phase 2. TWR handled the majority of development, with Renault Sport swooping in at the end just to finish it off. The idea was to make the Phase 2 more manageable than the Phase 1 for, well, obvious reasons. The new car got an updated engine thanks to a reworked cylinder head and a freer flowing induction system. That meant more power, and couple that with fresh gear ratios, it was a little bit quicker than the car that preceded it.
Its chassis was extensively reworked. It had a 33mm longer wheelbase, 23mm wider front track, reworked suspension and damping, stiffer subframes, new bump stops, longer trailing arms, bigger air intakes, 18-inch wheels, and you could have it in a fetching shade of yellow. As Renault Sport took over towards the end of development, it was built in the old Alpine factory in Dieppe, once again by hand. Renault says it's a far less angry car, though it could still bite if it wants to, says the internet, in the wet especially, and if you look at it funny. That's what they say, but what's this one like?
So far, it's only had a go at me once because there was some standing water and some gunk on the road, and because there's no traction control, the rear decided it wanted to go any direction other than the one I wanted it to go to. It was a bit of a moment, but it's been fairly decent, to be honest. As a car, as a cruiser, something to bimble round in, yes, there's a big V6 in the background, but it's not as intrusive as you might think. On the motorway down here this morning, I was cruising quite comfortably. It was a soothing V6 thrum. The V6 itself, it's beautiful. The power delivery is so smooth. You give it just a gentle tickle and it's instant torque. Yeah, it's not massive power by today's standards, but its delivery is so silky, so easy. There's no big lump of power to fire you forward. You just flow with the car. It can be aggressive if you want to give it a proper kicking, which I have enjoyed doing on numerous occasions. But there's nothing there that can overwhelm you unless you start to be a little bit of a numpty with it. For example, dipping clutches and hammering it mid-corner. That's when things get a little tricky. Otherwise, handling-wise, you do have to build up to the car. All the weight is quite high up and in the middle, so you have to learn it, how it feels and how it behaves at any given moment. But once you get it, it has a beautiful flow to it. You can point it into a corner and then as you go in, just gentle tip, give it a little bit of power and then it hunkers down and fires itself forward. When you get it, it just feels right. It works. Okay, you do have to be careful, especially in the wet, because, well, it might bite you, but it handles beautifully. The steering isn't the most precise in the world, but bear in mind it's, knocking on 20 odd years old. With sharper steering, this would be a proper weapon, like a proper weapon. But as it stands, it does the job. Yes, it is a nightmare to do tight manoeuvres and it does feel a little slow, input, output, it could be faster, but it works. As the car's Achilles heel go, or Achilles heels really, can be quite bitey, and the steering, we can sort of forgive it for the car's ridiculousness. Frankly, the engine, the power delivery, and the fact that when you do get it right, it just feels magic. It feels like, well, a proper mid-engine car. You can kind of let those go. The brakes are pretty solid as they go. They hold up considering how old the system is. It does feel like proper race car tech. You can be firm with them and they will stop the car. Something that does really surprise and delight is the ride. Yeah, it is a little bit jiggly over really rough roads, but when you're driving around normally, you're not punished for having the silly V6 car. You just have a car that happens to have an engine where there should be rear seats and a boot, which is just ridiculous. The reputation, I understand, it is earned, and I have experienced a tiny bit of what it could be. But this is a car to learn and to enjoy. I think the initial rep of people going straight off, balls to the wall, let's see what it can do, and then finding out that actually something like this with its weight distribution is a bit fighty, I understand that. But really, if you treat it carefully, with a teeny tiny bit more caution and build up to it, this is a really rewarding car to drive. It's a proper triumph of ridiculous engineering. I mean, there's no reason this should actually have been built. It's stupid. The triumph here isn't the fact that it's brilliant, because get in any other hot hatch and you can go faster and have more confidence in it. The triumph is the fact that it was built and it's really good fun. The noise is beautiful. I love the way it sounds. I love the way it feels. I'm not a fan of the steering. I'm not a huge fan of the fact that I am mildly terrified of it the moment rain starts. But as a thing, how marvellous, just how wonderful. It's a really good bit of engineering. It's pointless, but it's brilliant. God bless Renault for just saying yes. Well done.
There are two sides to every coin. See, while the car came with horror stories from the press and lots of people who've been nowhere near them, others, like racers, are less critical. When you hook it in, they say, it's blinding.
It wasn't as quick or as exciting as a Clio 172. It wasn't as fast as similarly powered cars, nor as dynamically accomplished, but it was different. So different that no one's tried it since.
Both phases of Clio V6 are hugely sought after today. The original will likely try and eat you, but this, well, it'll still try and eat you, though it'll at least be nicer about it. How sought after are they? Well, in period, a Phase 2 car was a fiver shy of £26,000. In October 2020, one went for more than £60,000. Right.
Fewer than 3,000 Clio V6s were built, a little over 600 in right-hand drive. It was rare, it was silly, and it was unlike anything else, and that makes it pretty special. The final word on it, though, should probably go to Renault from the brochure for the Phase 2 car. You see, it shows that Renault knew exactly what this car was and who it was for. The brochure said, but overwhelmingly, it is a car built to be driven, hard, demandingly, by a knowledgeable driver. The more you ask of it, the more amply it rewards you. Until, of course, it didn't.